Hello, welcome to this week's CleaveTech Tech Tip. Well, you join me in preparation for one of the biggest races on the UK slot racing scene, and it is the BSCRA 132nd National Championships. So in today's video, I'm going to go through some of the preparations I'm making, some of the decisions I'm making ahead of turning up at the big race. As I was saying in the introduction, the 132nd Nationals is a very prestigious event. It's been around for many years. I'll put a list of all the past champions on the screen now, courtesy of the BSCRA. But you can see there's been quite a few champions over the years in the different classes, and it's run nearly every single year except for the COVID year. Unfortunately, COVID got to the slot racing community as well and stopped us from running the Nationals. But it's been going a long time, with lots of very famous names on that have also gone on to win World Championships as well. So it's a tough event. All the top drivers from the UK will be there, and it's going to be quite a challenge. So I've got to put in a lot of effort, prepare the right things. So let's get on with it. So we're going to start with tyres. Now, if your race is a handout tyre event, then there's obviously a lot less preparation you need to do in regards to tyres, because you're going to get handed out a pair of tyres or two pairs of tyres at the race, and then you're going to true them up and run them, and that's your lot. That's all you can do. But this race isn't a handout tyre event. They are generally open classes. You can run whatever tyres you want. There are obviously some restrictions on body shells and so on that you can use, and one of the classes has a restriction on motors. But apart from that, they are fairly open classes of racing. I'll put a link on the screen and in the description for where you can see the rulebook for all these classes. Now I've got a box of tyres here that are all pre-glued and skimmed down to a rough size, so they're a bit larger than I would normally race, and then I can true them down to size when I actually get to the track and decide which compound of tyre I'm actually going to be using. But I've going to glue up some new tyres for this event as well. New fresh tyres tend to be slightly better than tyres you've perhaps had in your box for a few months or even years. But these tyres here in the box, they've been stored in sealed bags, in the dark, in the cool, so that's about the best you can hope for to keep your tyres as fresh as possible. But over here, as I say, I've selected some newer tyre compounds to try out and test at the Nationals, and hopefully I'll find a nice grippy compound that works with the other rubber that's on the track. Now, they're all different compounds, but I'm not going to let off my secrets yet. That's for maybe a Tech Tip Extra in my Tech Tip Extra series that's going to be coming very soon. But what I've done is I've had a look at what tyres I've got already in the box here, and I've added some more tyres. So some of these tyres are the same compounds as I have already. Some are new compounds to try out. I've also worked out what size hubs I'm going to be using. So if you haven't seen my video on hub size, I'll put a link on the screen up here now. Have a look at that, because the different size hubs make a difference to how the car is going to perform. Even the flexibility of the hubs make a difference into how the car is going to perform. So I have, again, another set of hubs here that are quite flexible, these Velico hubs here. So I'm going to be trying those out on a particular compound of tyre that I know quite well. Now, as I said, there's 3 classes of racing at this national championship, so I'm going to need plenty of tyres. Each class of racing has a qualification, or 1 minute fastest lap. Then we have an 8x3 minute race, and then probably an 8x4 minute final, or it might be an 8x5 minute final, but more likely an 8x4 minute final. So there's quite a bit of racing. So you're going to need to change tyres after your heat if you make it through to the final. So you're going to need 2 pairs of tyres for each car at least, or for each class. One for the heat, one for the final. Obviously I'm hoping to make the finals in each one, but you never know. You could have a disaster, you could have a big smash and maybe not make it. But I'm also preparing tyres for a friend of mine who I'm also racing with and going along with, so I need to therefore prepare tyres for him too. Then you're probably going to need a practice pair or a spare pair in case you strip a gear or have an accident or the tyre wear out faster than you would expect. So you can actually end up getting through quite a few pairs of tyres at an event like this. So bearing that in mind, That's at least 18 pairs of tyres that I would like to take just for me individually to try and race. So remember, that's 3 pairs of tyres for each one of the cars, and I want to take at least 2 different compounds, one perhaps more grippy than the other, because you never quite know which one's going to work best on the car and how the rubber's built up on the track. Sometimes you want your car to move around a little bit more rather than be totally stuck in a rut. So 2 different compounds, 3 lots of tyres for each car or each class. So that adds up to quite a few pairs of tyres needed. So if you haven't seen my video on preparing tyres, again, I'll put a link on the screen up here. Have a look at that. And then I'm going to go away and prepare some tyres, and we'll be back for the next stage of my preparation.
Much later.
So the next thing we're on to is body shells. Now, again, there's 3 different classes. Mostly the body shell choice is fairly obvious. One body shell rather than another tends to have perhaps the most downforce and the best handling on your car. So choosing a different body shell or having many different combinations of body shell is not normally necessary. So starting with the saloon car class, my normal shell of choice has been this better Aston Martin. I do like it. I think the wing's really nice on it. It's got a nice rake on it. It has some nice scoopy bits, and it does provide quite a fair bit of downforce on the car for a saloon shell. And it slips through the air quite nicely still down the straights. And I do quite like the handling of this one, but in accidents it's been quite weak across the front here. And I've had a few occasions where it's got sort of tucked up a little bit, and it's been a bit of a pain in the neck to fix during the race. But I do quite like the shell. My other choice, which I'm trying for the first time, is the choice of the person that won this class last year. And they used one of these Mack Holden shells. So again, quite flexible. It doesn't quite look as though it's got the downforce of the other shell, but the person that races it reckons it does actually have good downforce, and I have been assured by other racers that they do actually like the way this car handles, or this shell handles on their chassis. So I'm going to give it a go. Now, I have a couple of these painted up already, but I need to make sure again I have a spare shell. So you probably want at least 2 body shells for each class, more like 3 body shells for each class. So I'm going to prepare 3 of these Holdens, and I'm going to make sure I've got 3 of these Aston Martins. And because I'm going to generally only be using one type of chassis with the pinholes in the same place, then it makes it much easier for pinning my body shells. Now, if you haven't seen in my video on preparing body shells, I'll put a link up here. I've got a nice body jig as well that I use to help me jig up all the pinholes and get them mounted nice and squarely. So again, if you haven't seen that video, I'll put a link up here now to have a look at my body jig. But I think that's about the minimum number of shells that you're going to need, because if you're in the heats, you could get a shell damaged. Therefore, you need a fresh one for the final. Again, you probably need one for practice that's perhaps not going to be in the best of conditions after you've finished practicing. So I would say a minimum of 3 shells of each type pinned for your car. Moving on to the Formula 1 class. Again, this is my body shell of choice. This is a Colhoza Formula 1. Can't remember exactly which make of Formula 1 car it's supposed to represent, but it's fairly generic. Now, my choice of using this shell is because it's also legal for ISRA Racing, which is the International Slot Racing Association, and it's also illegal for the World Championships. So by preparing these shells, I might also have some shells that I could use at the World Championships as well. And it's also a very, very good shell, good performing shell. It channels the air nicely through the middle of the body shell. You can see there it has a pretty good wing on the back. You get fairly good downforce from this shell, and it's pretty strong as well. They last a fair while. So again, I've got a number of chassis for this class, but all the pinholes are all in the same place. So it makes it easier when I'm preparing the shells. Although, in classes like this, and especially the Eurosport class, which is coming up next, you might consider the position of the body shell on the chassis. Whether you mount it as far back as you can get it with a guide just inside here, or whether you mount it as far forward as you can get it before the rear wheels stick out the back, because that can also affect the handling of your car, because it basically affects where the downforce on the shell acts on the chassis, whether it acts more towards the front or more towards the rear. So where you put your body shell on your chassis can matter. Now, I've done some testing and I know where I like my body shell to be positioned on the chassis. So I'm actually going to prepare them all the same, all in the same position of where I like them. And the final class is 30-second Eurosports. Now in the UK, we're allowed to use quite high downforce shells in this class, and this is the BSP Cat Audi R10. This is my shell of choice. It is definitely the shell that has the most downforce out of all the shells available. Some people do like to use the Kolhoza Audi shell that's available for ISRA racing, which we have to run at the World Championships, but I think this shell gives far greater downforce than that shell, but obviously the other shell might give a better balance on your car. But this is my preference. These can be destroyed within a fraction of a second. One accident can totally destroy these. So you might want to have a few more of these available, especially if you intend to do some practice. So I'm probably going to have about 4 or 5 of these available for the racing to make sure I've got them all fresh and pristine for the race.
One eternity later.
So after you've spent many hours on tyres and body shells, we then move on to gears. Now, as you can see here, I've got a fair few gears that are already glued up, ready, that are all pretty new. Some are brand new, some have never been used. I've got lots of spare gears in here if necessary. But again, it's preparing gearing for your car for the track. I produced a whole video on preparing gears, so you can see a link for my video up here. But there's quite a lot of work to do with each gear that you want to use. Again, each class of car would probably use a slightly different gear ratio on it. So the saloon class, the first class we're going to be running, that's geared generally 740. No! 72 pitch gears. Now some people might use 64 pitch gears, some people might use 80 pitch gears. I will be doing a video on gearing and why you select certain gearing in the future as one of my tech tips. So watch out for that one. But with the testing I've done, I know that gear ratio works very well with my motors and on my cars and on that track. The only other change I might make is I might go to 739 to get slightly more top end down the straight if necessary. But again, that might involve moving the motor slightly because a 39 tooth gear is a smaller diameter than a 40. But I do have a couple of those available, not so many, but I do have a couple. But I'm mainly going to be preparing 40 tooth spare gears. The Formula 1 class is an inline motor class, and they use these type of gears here. So as I've said in a previous video, I like the S&K gears. You might have seen them in my gear preparing and lightening video. So again, I'll put a link up on the screen here. But they're great gears. So again, there isn't really much choice of gearing on these cars except change of pinion. So you don't need to change the spur gear much. And also, because they're inline cars, you could actually switch between a 33 tooth or a 30 tooth S&K gear. So again, that can affect the performance of your car. But my cars are all going to be geared 530. Again, they are 72 pitch. And that class has an open motor class, so you can run any motor you want in the whole entire world, as long as you can get the weight down, the grip up, the speed up, and reliability of your motor. There aren't really any rules on that. The final class, the Eurosport class, again uses angle winder type motors. So again, the gearing on that, there is a little bit of choice on the gearing on this. Some people run something like 644 or 645 80 pitch gears, and then some people have got fast enough motors perhaps, or motors with a different characteristic, might run something like 539 540 gear ratio. So again, I could use the 40 tooth gears that I've prepared for my saloon class on my Eurosport car, but again I need to make sure I perhaps prepared some 39 tooth spur gears as well to go with it, because I'm going to be probably running 539 or 540 depending on how the performance of each individual motor works around that track. So I'm probably going to want 3 or 4 gears of each ratio for each car or each class that I'm going to be running, because again, you're probably going to need a couple for practice, a fresh one for the race, a fresh one for the final perhaps, a spare in your box with your spare tyres on, so you've got again a fresh gear if you have to change tyres, or if you have to strip a gear you want to put a fresh gear on again. So I would say at least 4 gears need to be all drilled, lightened, glued on and prepared for each ratio that I'm going to be running on each car.
Meanwhile.
So let's move on to chassis. Well,